All right. So here are 15 thrash metal albums you might have missed in 2022. And, I really select these based on records that I develop this list usually throughout the year. And what I'm collecting is things that I probably wouldn't review in full because I don't have enough to say about them. Albums that were overlooked because of obvious kind of flaws, like maybe there's a drum machine that sounds like shit, or uh, there's just some reason why this just isn't uh, getting looked at and analyzed in a serious way by the greater population of journalists out there. Also, sometimes it's just stuff I couldn't get around with. It's great. So I'll have a reason for each one, but they're all going to be thrash related as best as I can manage. And a great example of a weird thing that a lot of people on the internet like that really didn't get any buzz in any professional space is Autonoesis, a, uh, a technical thrash metal band which is influenced by black death metal. There's even a bit of folk metal influence in there too, if you really want to cut around the edges of the introductory presentation. This is a very elaborately constructed sort of. I guess it's the bones of this thing is like Vector's like 2016 Prague album, but if we pull back a little bit, it's a guy who's interested in classic technical thrash metal who probably also enjoys groups like Dissection, a little bit of melodic black metal, a little bit of death thrash metal, and is exploring the abilities, well, the possibilities of adding quite a lot of reverb, which buries a lot of it, and just okay drum programming that gets the job done. It probably shouldn't bother you for most of the album, but there are a couple of songs which make it obvious that you're listening to a just okay drum programming performance. Um, I'm not doing a great job of like necessarily selling it, but if you sit down and you listen to that first like 9 minute and 15-second song that kicks off the record, uh, you'll get it. You'll get it right away. It's a really impressive thing, and yeah, it didn't seem like it had gotten picked up for any release, but I did see at the last minute when I was writing this that Mythic Ironworks picked it up for at least a cassette. I don't know if they put out the CD, but probably because I think it's for sale on their Big Cartel. So give this one a chance. It is a little bit buried in the muck, but that's kind of what makes it cool. It's a great idea that he's demoed in very full and elaborate form twice, and they really need to give these ideas the full treatment, the full budget, and the actual drummer that it really needs because yeah, this is just too good to be sitting there with a bad drum machine and that logo, which is just an awful logo. Um, so maybe more on the more clearly professional side of things that just people didn't really seem to notice in September. Amorphia is a band from India who, wait, right? Yes, Kerala, India, who play a late 80s style of thrash that a lot of people would call somewhere between street thrash and a little bit of Bay Area, where um, it is very much focused on creating their own sort of destruction influenced guitar work. There is a little bit of like Sodom and that German uh, thrash metal. And anyone who's familiar with late 80s German thrash metal kind of has to admit that all of that is very influenced by the more popular Metallica albums from that era, and that bleeds into this just a little bit. Um, I compared it to a little bit to Mortal Agony, I think, and Destruction here, and Shaw because the rhythms are not they're not machine-like. There is a little bit of a swing to some of the rhythms, and that reminded me of Shaw because of the guitar sound as well. I think it's a really good record. It's not a great record. It can be a little bit grating, but if you're just looking for like a real old school thrash metal record, these guys aren't. There's no pizza on the menu. This is just a thrash metal record, and I thought it was great. Um, Warchest have it's a Chile-based thrash metal band who they've gone in a lot of different directions. They started out with a little bit more of a groove feeling to some of their records, a little bit more of a Testament influence, and then they went in a little into a little bit more of a death thrash sort of aggressive side on their more recent full length. And now this most recent EP is very influenced by Chromax, and it's basically a crossover thrash metal record leaning towards thrash, and it's a very good one. It sounds authentically like late 80s. The songs are very well written. It doesn't have a ton of its own personality, but it's all very well made. And yeah, I kept listening to it because that's some of my favorite stuff is like late 80s crossover. I even I can't count how many times I've listened to like Crumbsuckers, Beast to My Back, and records like that. So stepping into this one felt very natural, and yeah, it's easy to recommend because I just feel like not enough people have paid attention to War Chest, and maybe it's because they keep changing what they do with each record. Um, a Brazilian thrash metal band, Sadistic Messiah, uh, put out Humanizing Process mid-year or later in the year, and this record is pretty interesting. So it takes some classic Brazilian thrash metal, kind of post Beneath the Remains stuff like The Mist in their first couple of records, and maybe Chakal around that area. That they were never kind of all that sophisticated, and then it throws in a pretty heavy influence from Necronomicon, the German band, and you'll hear that right away in the vocals. It's brusque and forceful, but it's still classic thrash metal. It's not death thrash metal, and it's the kind of thing where like if you understood those references right away, you'll see why this is cool and why I picked it up on it right away. But if you don't really know late 80s thrash very well, it's just going to kind of sound like just another thing. Uh, so I thought it was really cool. You don't hear a lot of vocalists who kind of go for this like apocalyptic nightmare kind of sound without drenching it with reverb completely because it kind of was back in 1987. So I just thought this was awesome. It's the kind of record where I want to buy that CD and just kind of stare at it because I'm an idiot like that. Uh, and if there's a place that's going to bring thrash metal back into people's interests these days, that's adjacent to death metal a little bit, the creator and sort of late 80s side of aggressive early extreme thrash metal is the place to do it. I think that this like what do you think when you see that album cover? You think that this is probably a maybe a black thrash metal band, probably a black death metal band, but it's pretty much a pure thrash metal band in terms of the vocals and the guitar work. Hellfuck's Diabolic Slaughter is uh, basically if you took extreme aggression, the cleanliness and some of the melodic values of that record, and gave it a little bit of death metal aggression. And uh, basically, the vocalist sounds like Millie Petroza, of course, but it's a surprising record with. It really shows like a huge fandom for thrash metal from these guys who were in Embryonal and Azarath and all that. Where like I wasn't expecting this to be just like a straight up thrash metal record. Like this was my kind of thing from the moment it started, and it's a really impressive record. And I have seen nobody talk about it. uh, I don't even think I got the promo for it. I think it just kind of I found it on Bandcamp, and I was like, well, let's give Hellfuck a try, and it was worth it. Uh, Insecurity is again a late 80s style crossover thrash metal record leaning towards thrash metal. There's a little bit of like an Anthrax touch to their sound. Um, uh, the guy on the cover is wearing an Excel shirt, if that tells you anything, but it's not melodic in that way. And the way so this is kind of a confusing record for a lot of people because it's somewhere in between classic thrash metal crossover thrash metal bands going fully thrash in the late 80s, like 88, 89. And, but it doesn't manage like the tuneful kind of alternative rock edge that a lot of, um, like post suicidal tendencies bands were going for either. So it's, uh, if you like the Crumbsuckers and Anthrax, this is probably at least a decent record, but one that doesn't quite have the personality of the bands that it influenced. It's kind of a salad of those ideas, given kind of a straightforward treatment, which again I like that, but I know that that's not for everyone who's looking for something that they're not familiar with. I've talked about critical extravasation before. This is a death thrash metal band out of Russia with members of Excruciation by Silence and Skyglow. These are very good musicians who can pretty much pick up whatever they want and be good at it as long as they like the music involved. This is more in the style of earlier Sadus and Aspid, obviously by the album title or the band name. And you'll hear some Pestilence and some actual death metal in there too. This is not just a thrash metal record up front. It is a death thrash metal record with a pretty fair parity between the two influences, and that means they might go a little bit more progressive, early progressive death metal on some songs, and they might just go straight death thrash metal on others, with never quite a straightforward thrash metal riff, but always a pretty good one in hand. Um, so Labyrinth is a Houston, Texas-based. Are they a trio, a quartet? And this is their first demo, put out in 2022. It's a great one. I think they released it on CD, but it looks like a tape here. And so their focus is really on the dynamics of late 80s Bay Area thrash metal. Sorry for the broken record here, but these were kind of where a lot of bands were landing this year that were any good. And if you're a fan of kind of late 80s Heathen leading into some of the, maybe 90, and Ulysses Siren, Violence, those bands, you'll appreciate what this band does. It becomes noisome, exuberant. Uh, it, it sort of becomes like a passing storm. There's a lot in these songs, but there isn't. It's not a very long demo, so it was enough of an experience that it just kind of stuck with me. It's like, what the fuck just happened? Like, this is a cool band, and I can't wait to see what they do next because this was really cool. Um, and I hope they keep that sort of handmade feeling to it, that authentic DIY feeling, because I think it really benefits. Like if they can manage the sound quality, that's all you really need. If you're not looking to break or whatever. So Faust is a Polish death thrash metal band who have some interesting, just general ideas here that a lot of people consider progressive. I think it's just a different, um, folkish and sentimental European, Eastern European accoutrement to the experience. Um, it is an evolved, progressive kind of metal that's hard to describe. Honestly, it's really here because the other records that I had lined up for alternate spots just weren't as good as this one. Uh, and it's only tangentially related to thrash metal in the same way that, like, the second depressive age definitely is, but it is a lot of other things. This is a lot of other things. This record is also not primarily thrash. It's really a traditional heavy speed metal album. With It's from one of the members of Demoniac, who plays all the instruments, did the album art. The album art's particularly bad. I mean, that's just the NASA picture of the starfield and a rough painting on top of it. But it's a great, exuberant, and definitely very creative record. if you're 4 minutes into a record and the guy starts whistling a melody, you're in a good place. And I thought this was really cool, and this was kind of the place to. I probably should have put this on the heavy, the doom slash heavy metal, traditional heavy metal list, but it works here too because there is a lot of there's speed metal behind every song here, uh, and it reminded me of Horcus and Hermetica and uh, Argentinian power speed metal from the early like late 80s and early 90s. It doesn't sound exactly like that, but there's like an exuberance to it. There's a power metal influence to it, like an early power metal influence to it that I think is pretty cool. Uh, Worth checking out at least, and entirely different and on a different tip entirely is Polish black thrash metal band Witchmaster, who are definitely influenced by a lot of the more impactful works out of South America in the mid 80s for extreme thrash metal, as well as uh, some of the more distinctly European versions of that. So you might hear a little bit of early Merciless here and there, uh, but a lot of it has like a sarcophago or just basically they're just thrash metal riffs in here at grindcore speed. And yeah, the best songs on here, like I say in here, they really get into a big thrash metal riff and freak out around it in a brutal way. This is a particularly brutal record in terms of the lyrical content, and it feels like they're recapturing the uh, veracity and violence of 80s extreme metal in a really cool way. It's like they just don't give a fuck and they're just attacking it in a real way that is rare these days. It's outrageous, it's violent, it's really impressive. And yeah, I just didn't get around to reviewing it in November and I was like, well fuck, this is a great record and it's kind of everything I like about 80s extreme metal, including thrash metal riffs. So definitely check that out if you're into that kind of thing. Um, yeah, I'm not quite as big on recommending Lacerta's The Age of Lacerta because it's a band that they basically spent 6 years making this record through trial and error, and that means that a lot of the first songs they wrote are very basic, sort of Iron Maiden esque heavy metal epics, and eventually this works up to sort of a traditional heavy metal meets sadist esque thrash influenced heavy metal. There's a lot that's in this record, but it did feel like it was related to and influenced by thrash metal in general. And I thought it was worth mentioning. Uh, you'll see that the songs, if you stick with it, the songs do get a little bit more involved as they continue. But yeah, they use a drum machine on this thing, and then that's going to be terrible for most people. Real drumming is going to be essential if you spend this much time making a record. So uh, definitely the kind of thing where they probably should have just fired off a few crap records and learned those lessons fast rather than putting all their eggs into a 6 year sort of project, which they should probably, you know, quickly iterate upon. Uh, or, you know, I'm interested to see what they do next if they go ahead with it and decide to put more actual money into things like drummers and art and things like that. So I think it's worth putting all that into these ideas because they are influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal, speed metal, and thrash metal. So it was worth mentioning, and so is Needless. Even though I don't really like this album very much, it's just kind of an average melodic death metal influenced thrash metal record, which is just very modern, average, not particularly interesting to me. It is very centered around uninteresting grooves, but I really like the themes. I think they've improved a ton since their last record, and it reminds me of some of the better records from Moore's Principium Est. So it was worth mentioning here, just to give a little bit of variety, basically. Same reason with Sadistic Ritual. I really liked Sadistic Ritual's debut full length. It was great. It was kind of a brutal thrash metal record. It was uh, not quite like a full on Demolition Hammer style record, but it was kind of getting there. And this is an experimental shift towards the inevitable sort of black heavy metal kind of thing, but they're still very much a thrash metal band. It's kind of like they had the bones for like 3/4 of a record, and then they kind of, it seemed like they scrapped it and kind of threw in different vocals, tried to play around with the idea so that it wasn't just another thrash metal record. And unfortunately, I think something a little bit more rote might have been actually more interesting. I hate to say that. Uh, it's a little bit of a cacophony that doesn't ever get to a point, but it does have some good thrash riffs, and they're still good musicians. So it's, I'm not dogging on it. It's a cool thing. You can see that it's unique just looking at it, but I don't know that the idea is mind blowing or special in any way, other than that noisome, haunting strangeness that doesn't fully arrive in their production. You know, still worth checking out. I'd really recommend their last album to thrash metal fans in general. And of course, I had to have just like thrash, a black and speed metal record on here. And Terror Hammer's Gateway to Hades has been a little bit underrated. It's definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of like Barbarian and Butcher. And uh, I kind of heard the kind of Motorhead, kind of Tor influence on here. And I like bands like that. I like black speed metal that leans into Motorhead rather than dances around them in terms of the guitar work. And yeah, this is just a solid, well done record. So definitely worth checking that out. So that's 15 thrash metal records. Let's call them thrash metal adjacent records for 2022. As you can see, the traditional thrash metal space is full of rote and uninteresting bands who are productive, and then there's a lot of new talent that doesn't get recognized because it's a bit weird. Obviously, I'm more interested in the weird bands, but uh, thrash metal does definitely need a lot more attention, a lot more fandom, and a lot more kind of money being pumped into it. So support whatever bands in thrash metal that interest you, because we need more of it in heavy metal and less atmospheric bullshit, I guess. So there you go.